In 1996, author David Foster Wallace released his magnum opus, Infinite Jest, an 1,100-page postmodern takedown of the great American novel. It was a smash success all throughout the world. Unfortunately, it just wasn't very good. Famously dense and nigh unfinishable, the book earned a backlash as great as its praise. Join me, Jesse Dram, as we untangle this tale of boredom, addiction, and French-Canadian separatists in our quest of understanding on the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast. Hey everybody, I've been a talkative boy this week. There's a lot of stuff on here, so if you want to skip the intro where I talk about a lot of you out there who have been reaching out and given a lot of feedback on the show, you can skip to the episode proper at roughly 23 minutes in. Our guest this week is my cousin, and we had a lot to talk about that didn't directly... We talked a lot about just being a fan of literature, and not only that, but just, you know, how we got into David Foster Wallace and our thoughts on it, but also our own interpersonal family history. We talk about, how your class has a lot to do with whether or not you like David Foster Wallace. The age you read Infinite Jest having a big effect on you. If you want to skip all that and get right down to the breakdown, that's going to be about 50 minutes in. Again, this is a long one. That's why I'm putting this caveat at the beginning. I think your hair looks particularly good today. Just wanted to put that out there. Looking sharp. Don't change a thing. Please keep listening. All right, on with you. Back to the intro. Previously on the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast, Jesse spoke with comedian Ben Pernick discussing the ins and outs of Infinite Jest, pages 121 to 151, and Jesse left you on the hangover that he expected to lose his job this week. Well, guess what? Just call me Jesse Nostradamus, because I got let go on Friday. Hell yeah. Very glad, actually, to... I'm very glad that throughout this, we have been on quarantine and working from home since March 13th, which, as those mathematicians out there will realize, is 3 months ago. That entire time, I have been gainfully employed, 40 hours a week, fully insured, and I may have made a little bit of a stink about return to the office last week, but I was predictably laid off, which means this podcast is about to get so much fucking better because I have nothing else to do. I'm going to record a new theme song. I'm going to put paid advertising out there. I'm going to overproduce the shit out of this. I might even buy some decent audio equipment. What? I'm selling the fuck out. How you doing? I Hate Infinite Jest fans. This is episode 6. I am, as always, your host, Jesse Dram. Today, we have a very special guest in what is honestly my favorite episode yet. Our guest this week is Cousin Frank. Yes, the world-famous Cousin Frank. No, you're not forgetting some classical children's TV host that you don't recall. He is literally my cousin Frank. He has a very important job, and so does want to have his last name hidden, anonymous, away from the filthy scum that is podcast audiences. Now, I try to explain to him, Frank, this is other podcast audiences. We're made of decent people who just are united in hating a very bad book that hurt us so much that we have Stockholm Syndrome and believe it is great. And he said, they're just like all the rest. My cousin, I really wanted to have Frank on here, and we'll get into this. I'll actually let you know if you want to skip ahead to when we actually get into the book, because me and him talk for just a half hour on just how you get into books. And not only that, but how he and I influenced each other. How class comes into a lot of... It determines a lot of whether or not you enjoy David Foster Wallace writings. And determines what you like in general. We discuss how reading a book at the wrong time can ruin it for you. He actually flat out states in this, if I had read Infinite Jest when I was a teenager, I think it would have been a very negative influence on my life because I would have identified with it in all the wrong ways. Like, we got very deep on this. Frank is one of my favorite people ever, closest thing I have to a big brother. Well, one of closest thing I have to a big brother who also reads books. So he's affected a lot of my artistic choices and taste in everything from music to books and everything else. But anyway, I'll let you know how far to skip ahead on that. I need to read a little bit because we have so many people reaching out to us. And I say us. It's just me. Hi, it's Jesse Dram. I'm in my second bedroom. There's rabbit shit on the floor because that we have rabbits. And guess what rabbits do? They shit everywhere. So I guess I mean me and the rabbits. Me and the rabbits have gotten a lot of you reaching out, writing in to talk about what you think of the podcast, and we're going to read them right here. So in the future, if you would want to have any communication with me, I'm on Twitter and obviously Facebook at Jesse Dram, JesseDraham. Can't remember how to spell Dram. It's Dr. Aham or Graham with a D. You can find me on Instagram also at Jesse Dram. You can email me at jessedram.com. Sexy nudes only, please. Please don't do that. It will be the cover photo, thumbnail for the next podcast if you do that. And weirdly on Reddit, it's under Diamond Joe Quim, which is not supposed to be any kind of gross pun. It's just the character limit, short for Diamond Joe Quimby. Why am I under that, you may ask? Because I wouldn't say I'm a Reddit troll, but, well, actually, no, I wouldn't say I'm a Reddit troll at all. Trolls are fucking spineless losers. Let's just say there's discussions I would like to get in on that I would rather, if you want to learn something, and particularly if it's something you're ignorant about, you need to ask some ignorant-ass questions, and maybe you don't want to sign that Jesse Patrick Dram, Junior, born something 1986 social security number, please dox me anytime you have. And yet here I am giving all my information out. My phone number is 856. If you didn't all know my number, I would just give you the phone number of an enemy of mine. I don't know which enemy. I'd go make an enemy and I'd give you their number. Anyway, the shout-outs. Been meaning to mention him for a while. Person on Twitter, Infinite Jensen. If you can find them on Tumblr, that is Infinite Jensen, JENSEN.tumblr.com. This person has made sketches from the entire book of Infinite Jest that are really, really amazing. I'm a big fan. The one particularly last week of Mario and USS Millicent Kent is very good. In a book that I feel is lacking a lot of human touch, pardon me, in a book I feel is lacking a lot of human touch to actually see these characters portrayed, gets it across quite a bit. I really enjoy their work. Go check them out, infinitejensen.tumblr.com. Also, shout out on Reddit to JosBro23, JOSBRO23, for promoting the podcast while I have been slacking the fuck off. They've been putting the name out there. I'll be honest, I'm a little sheepish and shy on Reddit. I don't want to jump on to the Infinite Jest subreddit every single new episode because I feel like, even though nobody's making them click it, I feel like I'm interrupting the dialogue. But that's some shit I need to get over because this podcast is growing. I want it to grow bigger. I actually secured a really interesting guest. I don't know if any... Let's say they're very niche, but they're going to help me a lot. Regardless, shout out to JosBro23. We got shout outs. Ryan emailed, came across your podcast last week and have been burning through it. Really enjoying it so far. I don't know if you would call me a DFW superfan, but I've read Infinite Jest and just about all of DFW's other work quite a few times now. It sounds like you've got a great lineup of folks to speak with, but I've been reading quite a bit of his stuff lately and would love to join you one week if you didn't have anyone else on. Lives in Central Jersey, part-time composer. I love composer. last winter wrote a full piece of music for my wind ensemble about Wallace and suicide, which was played by my own alma mater, the College of New Jersey. So if you look up Infinite Jest Music, College of New Jersey, you might get a very interesting piece of music out there. So thank you for reaching out, Ryan. We're gonna keep that going. I think I'm going to have people on at some point. I've decided I'm going to start a side series, which will be whimsically titled Footnotes. Eh, eh. It's pretty goddamn clever. Um, this will be a side series where I'll invite people on to not only discuss David Foster Wallace's other work, because let's be honest, I only have 30 episodes of this if it's just Infinite Jest, and I'd like to make a little bit of money on it and get some advertising, so that would involve staying a podcast long enough to get a real audience out there. I'm unemployed. Take pity on me. Please tell your friends about the podcast. Rate, review, subscribe. Please, helps all of us. As of right now, I think our only review on iTunes says, love the podcast, never have Katu King on again because your sexual tension ruined it for me, which my girlfriend humorously tolerated reading. It'd be nice if I could bury that one so she never has to see it again. Thank you. And I'll have Katu back whenever I goddamn want, okay? Please rate, review, subscribe. Okay. Next message. Hey, Jesse. This is from Wyatt. Hey, Jesse. Enjoying the podcast, especially the format of digging through 30 pages an episode. Currently on my second read-through of the book. Read it a year ago. Really struck with me. As I reread it, one thing I suggest is to see the book as a series of stories in the Infinite Jest universe rather than one single narrative. Not a bad idea. They are all related to DFW in some way, but most standalone. I suggest you revisit pages 17 to 26. It is the best description of true anxiety I have ever read. Guess what? I'm going to go check it right now. Be right back, motherfucker. I just went back and reread it. I hate that chapter. Here is a secret. Anxious people are anxious because they are bad people. They judge people all of the goddamn time, which is why I do not miss a drop of schadenfreude when anxious people are tormented by their own anxieties, because their real concern is that people are judging them as badly as they judge others. That's not true, obviously. I just have a very different kind of anxiety, and I don't really sympathize much with a guy who's really worried about, what if my drug dealer judges me? Again, I can sympathize with the actual anxiety itself, but just like, I love you guys. Thank you, Wyatt, for sending that to me. That particular chapter you picked might have been my least favorite so far, but I understand that character does come back at some point, so maybe I'll change my mind. I have to admit, I am begrudgingly loving a lot of the stuff I'm reading as I go along. In this chapter we're getting to today, pages 151 to 181, because we have to make up our own chapters, because David Foster Wallace thinks Year of the Adult Depend Undergarment should be 45 fucking chapters. Yeah, that's easy to reference back on. Lost my train of thought. Oh no, I have anxiety. What if after talking shit on all the anxious people are going to think back now on what a piece of shit he is for having anxiety while he mocked their anxiety. Anyway. The chapter we get to today features the drunken rant by James Incandenza Sr. to Jr. When he's a young boy in a garage that is very brutal, and we get into a lot of talent that can be the albatross upon your neck when it comes to expectation that can last a lifetime. That's actually Cousin Frank specifically requested that he get to have that chapter. It's his first podcast ever because he wanted to talk about that chapter. Big shit. On Reddit, from user A High Time, with time being spelled like the herb. I like it. I'm up to part 2 and enjoying the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast so far, but I've got some information for you and Steve Clark regarding the Wardeen chapter that will help you better appreciate it. Like most readers, you wouldn't know any of this, but you're actually meant to find the scene offensive. In the 80s, when Wallace was at the University of Arizona's MFA program, quickly found himself at odds with his instructors. He was more interested in writing experimental and postmodern fiction, while they demanded realism. He and his friends sometimes even wrote and distributed a parody newsletter making fun of the program, for which they got into trouble. The scene in Infinite Jest had originally been written and submitted to the program during his time, entitled Las Meninas, which is a famous painting of the artist observing himself painting, while the subjects he's painting are themselves seen reflected in a mirror at the back of the room. I have seen Las Meninas. Check it out. It's breathtaking. In other words, it's from the point of view of the subjects who are watching him paint them. That was the purpose of Wallace's student. Sorry, my bias slipped out. I had a Freudian slip, and I said Wallace's stupid paper rather than his student paper, to show the writing program how awful the realism they required would appear to the people he'd written it about. That is it's a shame that time is an herb, because more than an herb, it should be a spice, because that is a spicy explanation you put out there. Definitely reframes and recalibrates the chapter that I referred to as David Foster Wallace putting on blackface for 5 pages. That is a very good explanation. I need to read more into that, because that was really, really cool. I like that quite a bit. Just gotta warn you guys, though, this particular episode, we're gonna get into some of the Mary Karr stuff. I know a lot of people love David Foster Wallace, but we really wanted to talk about genius worship and just the kind of blind spots I can put up. Oh, that's what I didn't even get to. On the Footnote series, I want to bring on some of you, the fans, the listeners, and have a little round table and discuss not just the specific works, although we will discuss the works as well, but the themes of David Foster Wallace and his writing. So I'll keep going there. Only 3 more here, and they're much shorter. From Clay Parson on Reddit. Hey, man, just wanted to give you a shout-out as I'm enjoying the podcast. It's an interesting idea, and as someone who does enjoy the book, it's been interesting hearing your viewpoint. If you ever need a guest that loves Infinite Jest but mostly hates the DFW hero worship, let me know. Clay, you're coming on. I don't know when. As I explained to somebody this week, a lot of the guests I've had on here have been either feast or famine. Like, I knew when I started, I have 3 people who really want to be on the show. And then I had a few weeks where I couldn't find anybody who wanted to be on the show. And now that I have people hitting me up asking to be on the show, I have like the next 5 or 6 episodes scheduled. It's a real clusterfuck. We're going to work it out. We're going to figure it out. Don't worry. Reddit user, once and foremost. So from your podcast, the Yours Truly section, I believe this was last week, we discussed Yours Truly and C and Poor Tony. I always thought of this as a stream of conscious section. Almost reads like a taped confession or a written statement where the cops just say what happened. Also never got the Boston accent you heard in this section. One other thing, I think we later find out who this person is. That's my theory anyway. He is integral to the story. Well, I just want to say how much I really like the podcast. I've read Infinite Jest 5 times, and I'm really enjoying hearing you become a fan. So, do you have to be a comic to be a guest? Well, that's all very interesting, once and foremost. Again, don't you guys realize I just want to hate this fucking book, and you're describing it and putting it in proper context is fucking ruining that for me? I just wanted to make a podcast about a book I thought was dumb and that everybody liked was dumb for liking it, and say, hey, the Emperor has no clothes and is a bad writer. And instead everybody's saying, well, actually the clothes are just post-modern clothes. They're not meant to be seen by you, but if you look at it in this framework, you might enjoy it. And then I have to begrudgingly go, look, just because you're right doesn't mean fuck you, okay? And fuck you for being right, you guys. Please understand I'm saying all this in jest. I am saying this all in jest. The DFW and Infinite Jest fan base has been so positive about this podcast and so supportive that I am kind of taking apart something you guys love, and I really really appreciate it. So, rest assured, any vitriol I put your guys' way, I'm fucking around at this point. You guys have been really good to me, and I'm enjoying you guys tolerating me playing in your sandbox a little bit. So thank you very much. No, you don't have to be a comic to be on. Just comedy is my wheelhouse where I feel comfortable. Which, by the way, go on YouTube, throw in my name, find a video of me doing stand up. I think I'm a funny guy. Some people don't. I still have a link, a private link I did for a contest where I had the crowd eating out of my hand. Eating out of my hand. And then I did a pretty edgy joke at the end that I didn't have to. And boy, I have never seen an audience turn on somebody so fast. And I saw it from the first person view because they turned on me. And I don't think I've done that joke since then. But you can't find that joke because it's a private listing. But watch my other stuff and see if you think I'm any funny. I am on YouTube as Mr. Jessico because it's just an old one. You know, it's really weird trying to be a performer and coming out and actually putting your name out there. Because that's the thing. You want to create all day. I want to create all day and have people read and enjoy and think and ponder the stuff I work on. But in this modern social media age, the moment you put your actual name on the post, you're opening yourself up for abuse. As I found with a fucking argument I got in last week where somebody who I was arguing with, completely not related whatsoever, they found a 6-year-old Facebook post I meant that had some bad language in it. I'm not gonna lie. If anything, it just goes to show how different a time it was that nobody called me out on it in the comments and we're actually discussing the thing. And this person just like, but just so you know, I have this in my back pocket. I can destroy you whenever I want. That's a fucking weird thing to deal with. And I know David Foster Wallace has some hang-ups about fame, and I literally did not mean that as a joke. That was a bad wordage there. I apologize. I truly did not mean that. But I know he had some issues with fame and putting himself out there, and that's something that I would love to talk about in our footnote series that you, the viewer, listener, just might be on. So again, reach out, rate, review, subscribe. Thank you guys. This is a long fucking intro. I'm going to go back and put a caveat at the beginning, say, hey, if you want to skip all this, skip all this. If you want to skip me and my cousin saying how much we love each other and how we affected each other growing up and how he got me into all my favorite art and how much I appreciate that, and then he tells me, like, well, you were always smarter than me, so I had to, that's why I took that jealousy and I became a very successful man while you got laid off and run a podcast. So if you want to skip all that, jump to about 50 minutes in. We spend about a half hour. We talk about a lot of stuff, but we skip some of it. If you listen to some of it and you're like, you know what? Not for me. I don't like Polish people, and I don't care about their relationships intrafamilial. Skip ahead to the Infinite Jest stuff at about 50 minutes in. And I am going to go back and give information on how you, the viewer, could have skipped all of this. If you've heard this, you're too deep in the lair. There was an option to get out the whole time. You missed it. You were making a left. And you wanted to make sure you had a clear way. And now you're stuck thinking, I wish this asshole told me I could have skipped ahead about 50 minutes. Oh, well, you're stuck with me now. I love you. Episode 6, Cousin Frank, pages 151 to 181 on the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast. New theme song coming this week. Maybe. And we are recording episode 6 of the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast, pages 151 to 181. My guest this week, we all know him. We've all seen him on the billboards and on the radio. Radio legend Cousin Frank. Yeah.
Prepare to be disappointed.
Yeah. Cousin Frank is not his nom de plume. He is literally just my cousin Frank. That is not his professional name, but he wants to protect his privacy from the many evils of the world, and I do not blame him as somebody who has been victim to the evils of this world. Cousin Frank, thank you for doing this podcast.
And way to set the challenge down. Thanks.
That's okay.
I'm going to be swatted.
Well, this is also your first podcast ever, so
right.
Obviously, if you're ever going to make a mistake on a podcast, this would be the one.
Yes.
So let's not look into it too deeply. Don't worry. The video is just for me and you. That doesn't go up anywhere.
Thought so. But I mean, first, did you ever workshop the name Infinite Jest?
I did not workshop Infinite Jest. Dude, SEO is a motherfucker. That's why, literally just put I hate Infinite Jest. That is the perfect. There's already so many people who hate this book and hate the fan base that, it would seem like this is your go-to one-stop shop for all your hating Infinite Jest needs right there and there. So. All right, dead silence. Right. We're doing good. That's all right.
Dead air. So yeah, Cousin Frank.
Cousin Frank. Our mothers are sisters.
Yes, that's how cousins work. Yep.
Our parents could have been brother and sister. You don't know that.
That's true. So I guess real quick, the reason I read this book was my friend Sean was reading it, and he had read it, and the way he described it when he was done was it was like watching a TV show that you really love, and that when it's over, you're kind of sad to see it end because you've kind of fallen in love with all those characters. And I had some vague familiarity with Infinite Jest. I didn't know the sort of how it sort of became a meme in itself. It was akin to as much as I knew about Gravity's Rainbow. It was just that big book that people read or pretend to read that I know nothing about the author. I know nothing about the story, right? But since
only the legend.
Yeah. So, even the vagueness of the legend, it was just something if someone said, oh, Infinite Jest, I'm like, oh, that's that big book. And that's about as far as my knowledge went for it. Mm-hmm. But Sean and I we read Dune together because of John Hodgman kept referencing Dune in his comedy.
Oh, yeah. If you have never read any of John Hodgman's The More You Know trilogy, it is one of the funniest.
Spectacular.
Amazing.
And he went into
another book series you turned me on to.
He actually went into more nonfiction, less humor, which is also because there were some, especially in That Is All, there were some sections in there where we got some personal, and I was like, damn, he's a really good writer. And he actually did write a sort of an autobiographical book called Vacation Land, which is also really good. And then he has another one out, and they're really good. It's there's his humor's in it, but it's more straightforward, not just a joke book, which is more information than you require, and complete world knowledge, I think is what it's called. Right. So we had read, and we started reading Swan's Way, because that's another book that's very long and very.
Who's the author on that?
That's Proust, right?
Proust, okay.
And he's an older author. That book was written, I think, last century. But I think we read that 1871, maybe. Oh, that's when he was born. So, 1913. So this early 1900s. But I think that was also we read that because I think it was there was a Monty Python bit where there was this a contest was who can summarize a remembrance of thing past in the quickest way possible or something like that.
Okay.
And the joke being that remembrance of things past is 7 books long, and it's 800 pages per book or something. It's a long book, and there's no reason to really read it except if you like torturing yourself, or if you just wanted to maybe get this stupid Monty Python bit a little bit better.
I have definitely read hundreds of pages to better understand a 3-second joke that I picked up from The Simpsons. I've been in this whole quarantine thing. I have been watching a lot of movies, and all I can say is the amount of Simpsons references I now get is astronomical. Like, what the fuck? The Natural, which is pretty much everything from Homer at the bat that I never
yeah,
realized.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you grow up and all of a sudden these references start to like, oh yeah, wait, like Simpsons made nothing original. They were all just like commenting on what was popular at the time.
Exactly.
So full disclosure, I'd never finished Swan's Way. It was just too much for me. I probably read like 80 pages. I was like, I don't want to do this. This is stupid.
That was pretty much my reaction to this book when I first read it.
Yeah. So Infinite Jest, I read it and I talked to you about this before, that I think I read it in a more of a unique way, where I drive a lot for work, and the drives I make are, and your first guest kind of touched on this. What was his name?
Dan Ostrov.
Dan Ostrov. He touched on this, and it like, he summarized it perfectly. And I feel like most of my thoughts on the book kind of mirror his almost identically. But he mentioned something about books on tape, where I used to be very anti books on tape, anti audiobook, because I was just lazy. But then he mentioned something about like that you have like these long drives where you're not just like driving through a city, but like just like long drives down one highway for like 3 hours, right? And those are the kinds of drives I make during work, where there's really not much else going on in my mind besides just like pointing it straight.
Right.
So,
by necessity, you're using a very small quadrant of your brain.
Exactly. And it's boring, right? And I was reading, I was rereading Game of Thrones, which is like, I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan, the books. And I was wasting so much time driving, and I saw, like, I downloaded like listening to a podcast. So like, oh, download Audible for a free month. So I did that, and I got the first book for free, and I listened to it, and it was like a good way. So it's like I would drive for 3 hours, and then I would carry the book with me, and I would mark where I left off on the audiobook and like read from there.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
And it was really, what I realized is that just like, you have, audiobooks are usually done by professionals, right? Like actors. And the guy who did the audiobook for Game of Thrones is like this old actor. And they have a way of sort of, I guess, giving characters a voice where there's like a little bit more emotion than just like my monotone, dumb voice in my head as I'm reading.
And then Galthor said, "We will kill them before they reach the gates."
So I was like re-listening to, I was listening to some of these passages that I've read before. Like, it was like my third read through. And there were like some emotional beats that like I just weren't getting from reading my own, and then like hearing him like read some of these chapters, I was like blown away. Like, my God, like I didn't even get this when I was reading. Like, what is going on? And that's kind of the same thing. So when I read Infinite Jest, I was doing those long car rides, and I wanted to not waste them, so I put it on, knowing that like, okay, audiobooks are fine. I can like listen to audiobooks, and they're actually helpful. But like, I wanted to give Infinite Jest, like, I wanted to put the work in. So I was like rereading a lot of the stuff that I heard, or re-listening to chapters I already read, and just trying to keep track, which is a very difficult thing to do with a book like this, because you would hear the end. They don't read the footnotes in the audiobook. They just,
that's
like,
right. The last person I listened, I did the episode with, did the audiobook, and he said that you still needed like a hard copy of the footnotes to reference. Yeah.
So I would like go back and like reread the footnotes and reread some of the chapters. But the guy who did the audiobook, his name is it's like
Pratt
Sean
something, right?
Sean Pratt.
Okay.
And the chapter specifically that, I think we're going over today, I read it first, and then like I re-listened to it, and it was like night and day between me reading it and then him sort of acting it. And it's like, I don't know if there's a way I can like send you a snippet of an audiobook, but it's truly like amazing, like how he sort of confronts this chapter. The sort of the monologue of his father.
The chapter we're discussing today.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's sort of my story of Infinite Jest. I read it. After I was done reading it, I felt cheated, because there's a lot of build up, and I'm sure this has been told to you before, but like there's no payoff, right?
No.
and I was like, okay, like I read it, it was good, but you know, I guess I don't see the hype, right?
Right.
And then like I started like I said, I had no familiarity with David Foster Wallace, and I started like doing some deep dives into David Foster Wallace. You know, I watched This Is Water, which you mentioned before, which is great.
Right.
I watched a lot of his interviews, and like one thing I noticed is that and read is that he is a very smart guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's just like, you can tell there's like an intelligence there.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when you see that, you just sort of submit to that person's intelligence and say, okay, maybe the issues with the book I have are just me just not getting it, or maybe there's something I'm missing.
Oh,
right?
So you genius gaslight yourself.
Yeah. So, but it's like if like
maybe
a
he's
mathematics
right.
professor was like, no, like this equation works, and I would look at it and say, okay, I mean, I don't get it, but you're saying it works, so it works. You seem like a really smart guy, right?
Mm-hmm. Guys, you don't know you don't know what it's like when I do guess it right. It's so good then.
So the perception I had of the book, first of all, when I first started reading it, and you started listening to a lot of the characters, I first thought, like, this was probably when the first 100 pages, like, oh, here we go, another book like this, very, very fraternal, very male oriented,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which is like books that I grew up reading in high school. You know, like Kurt Vonnegut, which I know we both read.
Mm-hmm.
Even like books like Johnny Got His Gun, 1984. Like these are the books that sort of like got me started, you know, in high school. And looking back, it's like those are very like male dominated books.
And you don't even think of it at the time.
Yeah, and not at the time. You would think that. And you know, I've been trying to get away from that a little bit, because I feel like it's important to have different perspectives, right? So I've been trying to challenge myself to read a lot of you know, authors that don't necessarily look like me, right?
See, I don't think I've read many books written by women. I've always just assumed that their breasts got in the way of their typing.
I feel like it's yeah. No, but I mean, it's also funny because like one of my favorite books is To Kill a Mockingbird, which is obviously famously written by a woman, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, and I think that the reason I like that book so much is because there's something so universal about it. Whereas like this book, Infinite Jest, is like yeah, I feel like high school Frank would have related to girls not liking me, you know. Mm-hmm. Whereas like nowadays, I'm glad I read this book now that I'm older, because I feel like if I would have found this book in college,
you would have been all in.
It would have been dangerous. Yeah. Yeah.
See, well, that is part of the problem I've had with this book. Is it's just, I don't understand who it's supposed to. I don't get the appeal. Now, right. I'm starting to get the characters a bit more, because I do feel that the book itself kind of blossoms as you go along. Because that first 100 pages, there's a lot of just like, I don't need to listen to this fucking guy describe every piece of furniture in the room. I get where you're going for. Why don't you just put that in a sentence and save some fucking trees for this paper?
Here's what I want to say, and this is what I was kind of getting to, is like when I finished the book, I felt cheated. I felt like, okay, what's the hype? But then as I started like thinking about it more, I don't think I've thought about a book this much after having read it, and had it, my opinion of it, changed the more I thought about it.
And you're not unique in that. I've heard that from a few different people. And I feel a little bit like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That like, don't you see how wrong you are? It's really so nice over here. It's postmodernism is warm. But even looking back now, realizing when I first read this, I was like 21, 22.
Wow.
Yeah. So, well, one thing to put out there for people, you might have no relationship with your cousins whatsoever. Our family, extended family, is really kind of tight, that I find out is very confusing for most people. Like I've dated a lot of girls. It's like, I think I have like one cousin in Kansas. I don't know.
Your aunt is calling me right now.
Oh, your mom.
Yeah. Let me
put Karen on.
Mom. Can you hear me? What do you? I'm busy right now recording a podcast with Jesse.
All right, we were going
Okay.
Are you busy for the rest of the day or what?
No, not really, but he's napping, so.
Do you want us to order you Primo Tokies and bring them over?
Yeah, sure.
Ooh, can she bring one to Philly?
Give me an Italian. Get her like a cheese something.
We'll bleep out your wife's name.
Yeah.
Cheese toast.
Yeah, cheese hoagie. She likes provolone.
Provolone cheese toast.
All right,
Okay.
I'll text her, see what she wants.
What did you?
So as we all know, provolone
Yeah.
comes up several
All right.
times in David Foster Wallace's work. I'm personally more of a Gouda man, but
We behind the curtain there.
that's okay. I love that weird shit in podcasts.
Yeah. So
but yeah, so we you and I are close. So you might remember during that time, I might have been reading it at a particularly bad time because I was still just coming out of my weird conservative Ayn Rand bullshit era.
Yeah.
Which I admit I'm pretty. Maybe that's what makes.
I luckily, after I've read Fountainhead, and
I stand by the Fountainhead. Fuck Atlas Shrugged. I stand by the Fountainhead.
I think I totally I'd be the worst, because I read that and I was like, oh well, she's I totally misread it. I don't even know. I get it's a very libertarian book, and but I would it didn't even cross my mind oh yeah, conservatives would love this book. I just I had no idea.
You pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and you don't owe anything to anyone.
Yeah.
And then in Ayn Rand logic, that means you get to cheat on your husband whenever you want, using that as justification. So, but my point is the fact that I was still in that zone might have made me particularly unsusceptible to this book before I went out there and realized oh yeah, guess what, the world kind of sucks and you're not going to accomplish anything, which also ties into this chapter actually, as far as living up to being a great man. But so I told you a lot of my issue with this comes from class. Maybe I didn't see eye to eye because David Foster Wallace, son of academics, an academic himself. You have actually formed a lot of my taste when it comes to art, not only books, but I mean, also music. I ran around with a bunch of metalheads.
Right.
None of them listened to the band Death. You got me into Death. And I don't even think you listened to them beyond that one album.
Oh, I still listen to Death. Are you kidding me? Is Harvester of Human Sorrow, right? That's that album, I think.
You gotta say,
burnt copy of.
That was such a fucking disconnect for me mentally when I was young, and that was still identity based. How the fuck can you like Bright Eyes and Death at the same time? What the fuck is wrong with you? Chuck Schuldiner would murder Conor Oberst over and over. But
unlikely, because he's dead. So look who won that round.
That's right.
Conor Oberst won. Chuck Schuldiner 0.
Conor Oberst will live to bury us all. But particularly when it came to books and stuff, even to this day, my friends, when it comes to their books, our biggest book discussion is me saying comic books are not real fucking books. Why don't you read a real book? I actually have
agree
that
with you on this. Yeah,
I have that for a podcast coming up. A friend of mine, Adam Nutter, on the Nerds of Words podcast, does not read real books. He even posted on Facebook recently, you people do this for fun. Meanwhile, loves comics. So the challenge I laid down is I am going to read the comic series Super Gods, and I'm making him read Cat's Cradle.
Okay.
And then
here's a funny story about Vonnegut real quick.
Yes, we both love Vonnegut. You got me into Vonnegut.
I was reading Vonnegut
real quick. I remember when Vonnegut died, you called me up to hang out because you really needed somebody you could just identify
God, how
with.
Cringy. That's
oh well, no. But it got even worse because we did meet up on that, and then also on that trip, I mentioned by the way, I had a threesome with a mutual friend of ours and his girlfriend recently. So that conversation spun the fuck out.
But so this goes back to reading books at the right time, right? Where reading Vonnegut in high school, you read something like Breakfast of Champions, Slaughterhouse-Five. I love those books, and even I loved his later stuff, like Timequake was probably one of my favorites from him.
Timequake is a download great people don't give enough attention to.
Yeah. So I've read obviously I've legitimately read every Kurt Vonnegut book, And I remember hating Sirens of Titan. I remember hating Cat's Cradle. I remember liking, like, it's like when bands release their first album and you're just like, like, oh, okay. But you get in on it, like their second or third album, right? And you're just like, oh, so he grew into himself. And
exactly. Like you see like the seeds of like, oh,
Yeah,
I see. It's like when you watch Reservoir Dogs and you see Tarantino-isms
right,
before they're really codified.
right. I reread Sirens of Titan recently, like a couple years ago,
Mhm.
and honestly, like it was brilliant. Like I was blown away by how great it was. Like I completely forgot every detail in that book, besides like remembering it as being very dry and boring. And I don't know where those thoughts came from, because it's phenomenal. It is a phenomenal book. So this goes back to what I was saying, like reading books at the right time in your life where you have a little bit more perspective,
Right.
I think is very helpful. And I'm afraid to go back and read books that I read in high school that I loved, because I'm afraid I won't like them. I'm rereading Earth Abides right now.
I need to get a copy of that, because that's like one of those synchronicity, like it keeps popping up in my world, and I just haven't read it yet. I need to
It's
reach out and
it's
pull
very
it in.
appropriate of what's going on right now, but I'm finding it like very boring, like it's like it was written in like the 50s or the 60s, and it was before like if you read Lord of the Rings, I tried reading Lord of the Rings. It's boring because it's written like a movie.
I
like
just read
Frodo
it
and Samwell go here,
I just read it for the first time this summer, and I absolutely loved it.
Oh, really?
I was angry I didn't read it as a kid.
I feel like the movies are better. My favorite, and I took a screenshot of this. My favorite part of that book is oh God, people are gonna hate me. What's the elf's name? Legolas and the dwarf. Oh,
Gimli.
Legolas and Gimli, right? Like one of the good things in the movie is like their friendship blossoming throughout the trilogy.
Yeah.
In the book, there's one line in the book where it's Legolas and Gimli were behind, or Legolas and Gimli, who have now become fast friends, were in the rear. And I was like, is that it? Like that's.
They learned. The one thing I will say about the books is the scouring of the Shire is an awesome. I understand that doesn't work. You didn't even get that far to get to it, did
spoilers, you?
Jeez. You know how the Lord of the Rings films ends. In the books, Saruman is never killed. When the hobbits get back to the Shire, fucking Saruman and Wormtongue have taken over everything there. And the hobbits, now having learned to not be so weak and fight for themselves, basically fuck up Wormtongue and send Saruman off to the woods and beat the shit out of a bunch of hobbits. It's great.
Wow, that's fuck! You're gonna make me read about these books again.
Just read the end of Return of the King.
They are quick. They are pretty quick. That was one thing I was surprised about. It's like how quick they read.
But so one of the things I was going to get into here is that I joke a lot in my comedy about coming from white trash, which is technically true, but the other way I've put it is my parents were like the fuck up from each side of the family a little bit, which, my mom was young, my dad was young. And just the fact you and I coming from a very similar background and turning out completely different, like really plays into, well, obviously not completely different. You and I still get along. We're having a discussion here, but I am a podcaster who just got laid off from the job I don't like. And let's just say you're doing a good deal better for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things happening, but
there's some similarities in there.
Yeah. It's funny because I heard you mention before. You talked about me in a podcast a few podcasts ago, where you referred to me as like your big brother, right?
Which is funny because I know it probably seems we're closer, but I didn't have any older siblings, and I mean, let's be honest, there was cousin Mike, but he only guided us that far.
Here's something that I don't think people understand, and I don't think our parents even understand. And going back to like our upbringing, what I'm realizing now is that we're older is that like they're all crazy. Yeah. Every aunt and uncle we have, they're all batshit out of their minds, right? Yep. Do you agree? Like, yes. It's like there's no, like I used to think like my parents were like the ones that were like immune. Like now I'm looking back, I'm like, no, they were just as crazy. They're all crazy.
I think it just has a lot to do with how, like, if we break our family up, I
Yeah.
mean, there's the one family we can agree, like, oh, they were more success focused, and that's
Uh-huh.
why they have all the money. And like I have said to my mom within the last calendar year that when I was a teenager, I wish I was in the a house of culture and learning.
Well, it's funny because obviously, like when my mom would like hang up the
Oh,
phone with
shit.
somebody.
Hold on, I need to write that down. I said your last name.
Oh, thanks.
I caught
Well,
it.
my mom would like hang up the phone and like she'd be talking to like one of our aunts or your mom and like she'd say something like oh, you know, like she this wouldn't happen a lot, but she would just say something like, I don't know what she's like, she's having blah blah blah, and I would just sit there and like, okay, yeah, whatever. And now that I'm older and like I see how they all interact with each other, they're all the same person, right? Like our uncle, our aunts, like they're all cut from the same cloth, and they're all
a lot of anxiety.
They're all, yeah, exactly. I think that's a large part of it. So they're all like batty, right? I'm gonna get in huge trouble now. They listen to this. But so you were saying like the big brother. What I don't think people understand, and this is something I'd always like yell at my mom about, because she would say that too. Like, he looks up to you. You're like, you need to be nice to Jesse. And I'd be like,
I'm unaware of all this.
What the like? Because in my mind, we were like siblings of the same age, like 9 months of like Irish twins, right? Yeah. So I thought like I always had to hear about your freaking what was it? Your intelligent kids class that you were in.
Oh, AT, academically talented. Hell yeah.
I always had to hear about that bullshit. All right. So listen, pal.
What? You weren't in the smart kid class?
I was not. So I was meant to feel very mediocre against you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is this where you tell me that this is the seed behind your strive to succeed and why you're doing so much?
Well, I will say this. I think I owe a lot of it to a drunk extreme wrestler, right, who came out to a certain song, Enter Sandman. And that was the first time I heard Metallica, right? And that's something we would watch together. We would sleepovers, we would watch ECW.
Yep.
Sandman would come out, and he had that awesome song.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I got to find out more about Metallica. And I started listening to Metallica. And then I remember I was reading like my dad's Guitar World. So people may not remember, back in like the late 90s, if you liked a band, like you couldn't just go on YouTube or Spotify. Like you had to invest some money into figuring out more about this band.
Oh yeah.
So it's like I had the Black Album, and then I think I bought Reload because I heard Fuel on the radio. Like I wouldn't dare waste money on an album where I didn't hear any of the songs before.
Right.
And then my dad like had a bunch of Guitar Player magazines, and they were ranking the best metal solos, and one was ranked like number 9 or something. And I was like, oh, I never heard that one before. So I got And Justice for All, and then found out about one being about this book, Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. And then it like was all downhill from there. I was like, oh my God, books can be amazing. Like,
See, yeah, no, I definitely had that. I followed. That was one of the things I loved about Metallica, was that so much of their stuff was based on literary. Like they have a song literally called "For Whom the Bell Tolls." For fuck's sake.
Yeah.
And that was actually where I turned away from metal a lot, is when it got to, obviously I got into Korn and Limp Bizkit because I was 13 and that's who it's fucking made
and
for.
I just stood by like
and you stood by and
I let it happen. Sorry.
I was I don't know. I don't know if you were. I was very angsty particularly as like a little fat boy, just because that is, and looking back, I was never too insanely husky.
No.
You know what's funny? I actually, a few weeks ago, with that gym that was opening against Orders in Belmar, a post I did went like kind of viral, got like 1,000 shares.
Yeah. And
I knew I had to delete it when it stopped being locals and people from Montana like messaging me, calling me a pussy and shit like that. I'm still very sensitive to being called out for my weight, despite not being that big. But the fact that these people who hated me, who wanted to wound my pride, and the discussion was a gym, and none of them called me fat. The main takeaway I got is, like, I guess I'm not that bad. Yes, I won this one.
That's great.
Yeah.
So we should start this book, right?
All right, let's get into this a little more, and we'll just get into that. But yeah, I feel part of that is fuck. Yeah, let's just get into this book. We've gotten into enough. I feel like this is a drunken conversation we need to have on our own.
Yeah, this is the Jest Man Frankfeld podcast.
Yeah. Infinite Jest Man would have been a great title.
So we're here. I don't know what. So we're starting at 151 in our
our first little chunk here is 151 to 156. Where we're talking about Pemulus and Axford's urine sample.
Yeah.
Shit they have going on.
So this is something that comes up later. With the urine, and it is slice of life. And rereading this again, it's like one of the slice of life chapters. But rereading this again, you kind of this is a build up to something. For instance, I think is this? Oh no, I think that's the next chapter, or the chapter after the BS 1960. Oh no, he gets the DMZ, right? Pemulus.
Yes.
Yeah. And he talks about the DMZ in this chapter. Am I wrong about that?
It comes up a little bit. The most I got after that part that brings back up the urine again is we just get a little glimpse into him and his practice of refusing to get caught by saying if people want to do business with him, they need to call him and say, "Hello, I demand you perform a crime for me, or I will harm you and your loved ones."
Yeah, which is a really great way around entrapment. But
yeah. So we get in the description here that urine samples are taken 4 times a year. Over a quarter of the players over 15 cannot pass these. So Pemulus has a little side hustle of pretty much vending clean urine, which he gets from the sub 10-year students at the academy. And I put this in quotations because I love the line, warm, pale, innocent, childish urine that's produced in needly little streams that would pass any scan except one for Ovaltine. Yeah, I've frequently thought of my innocent childhood. I've never concerned the innocence of my urine back then.
Yes, your urine, you were just pissing away gold.
Before it turned all gritty and disillusioned.
You should have went to our local nationally ranked dentist academy.
There you go.
So this is, I'm sure there's something, because when I was preparing for this, I was obviously focusing on the Winter BS 1960 chapter. And I sort of, full disclosure, I kind of just quickly read this morning, the 151 to 156. One thing I loved about Pemulus is he's like the book's hipster.
I'm loving Pemulus as we learn more about him.
Like he wears his like ironic shirts because he's not good enough to get a sponsorship. And so it's just like, it's a good Pemulus chapter.
Yeah, he also, in the later one, he makes the nice little quip as he's on the bus and he sees Enid House, and how he just has the thoughts that like, oh yeah, my talents have pretty much allowed me to escape those kinds of people that otherwise I would be surrounded with. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so do you want to talk about the 1960 chapter, or do you want to maybe circle back to that?
Let me just, I think we can knock this out real quick with the Pemulus stuff. So yeah, they go to the dumpster, because I told you at this point, I also just do a little bit of summaries for whoever's actively reading along. They go to the dumpster at Enid Recovery House and send in Mario to find every empty Visine bottle for safe urine storage, under the guise of a good old-fashioned game of who can find, boil, and box the most empty Visine bottles in a 3-hour period without any authority figure knowing what you're up to. Mario always wins. Quote, when you're poor old Mario Incandenza, you take your competitive strokes where you can find them. I'm loving Mario more and more as we get along.
You should. Yeah, he is the book's hero.
Yeah. We get a little tidbit that Mario gets a kick out of pixelating people's faces on film. Pemulus comes from the wrong side of the tracks. Seems he's a little bit dyslexic. He is the only recipient of the James O. Incandenza Geometrical Optics Scholarship, because he's actually way better, like a natural hard science people. You know what? We can get into the next chapter, because the last little thing I have here is where Hal is talking about his own self-identification, which I think has a lot to do with what we read in the 1960 chapter.
Yeah.
So this is, you are the only person to specifically request a chunk of the book, and you requested this chunk for this specific thing, James Incandenza Sr. and his soliloquy. So if you want to take the reins on this, please.
Yeah, so it is. I think when when you first asked me about this book, you were asking me like what the first. You said people kept talking about how good the writing is, and you weren't seeing it yet. And you asked me like where was the sort of the first section where you thought, oh, this is actually written really well. And I said probably this chapter right here. This was like the first chapter that kind of I was reading it and jumped out. And there was like a lot of good chapters previously, like the whole marathon buying marijuana scene. I thought was pretty good. But this one, so it is Jim Incandenza Sr. So it would be Hal's grandfather. Is outside his garage with his son Jim Jr. and he's about to teach his son how to play tennis for like the first time, and he's sort of getting him prepared. They live in a trailer. He has a garage where he keeps his car that he kind of seems like he cherishes more than his own family. And he's just sort of like getting drunker and drunker as the chapter goes on, comparing how a body is to a car, how it's really just a machine. He talks about how his father never came to his matches. And then the finale is you find out that he injured himself, possibly slipping on a spider on the court during a match with his father watching. Just
as his father, like this is his first time his father has seen him play. He's only there because he's playing against the son of a client. The client's father is actually complimenting him, saying, wow, that kid of yours got some talent. And as he is already in the momentum of slipping on that spider, he hears his father say, yeah, but he'll never be great.
Yeah. Which is just like so heartbreaking.
Just as Jim like destroys his knees on the asphalt, as we'll find out, permanently
ruins his tennis career, any shot of a tennis career.
Almost as if God himself had been the one to say he'll never be great and then put it into action.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I want to ask you, because I was sort of excited to see you get to this chapter. What are your thoughts on this chapter? What did you think of it?
I loved it. I need to absorb it a little more, just because this is the first time in this book I've actually really not that I've just enjoyed it, that it actually really hit home.
Right.
Because I personally have a bit of obsession of being like a great man, or like being great in one way or another. And this has been on my mind heavily lately as I am kind of settling down with a woman where we're talking kids and we're talking marriage a lot, and I really wonder if that gate is swinging shut on me.
Yeah, so it's a chapter where, first of all, it's going back to what you're saying. We have a very young Jim Incandenza Jr., right? I think he's like 10 in the chapter.
Right.
And you have his middle-aged father. And sort of one of the things that I got from this chapter was that like they're so close just to making things right, where it just takes some logical figuring out on their part, where like something I would say to you is that you're young, Jesus, like you're not even
right.
You know, you got a lot of time ahead, and coming from someone who started a family like later than I would have liked, you know, there's no rush, right?
Okay. Now that you're there, okay.
Yeah. So one of the things I love about this chapter is it's like it's the whole book condensed into a scene between his father and son, right? And that's
right.
Obviously one of the major themes of this book.
This is something that permeates and ripples out through the rest of it, which I feel, while we've gotten a lot of descriptions of the universe, this is the first real like thesis statement that like this is the theme of this book.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It's like if you weren't getting it until now, this is it. I think maybe there's like bits of it when Oren and Hal talk. I don't know where the part is where they talk about how Jim's death. I don't know if that happens later or before this.
I don't think they talk about it. The only thing we really have
yeah.
is somewhere in here we have Hal is really striving to be like Oren and also be an accomplished athlete with the thing. And then all of the Incandenza children, aside from Mario, will be, famous athletes, and this would never occur to Mario in a million years to think of it like that. But
yeah. So a few notes I have about this is he refers to his father refers. So how we got it. James Sr. refers to his own father as himself, right?
Yes.
And he goes on just about how big of a disappointment his own father was, or not a disappointment, but just like how he just there obviously was no relationship there, and
right.
And you can kind of see that it's affected him in a great way. I can't imagine. So you have a very young James Jr. listening to this, and then he grows up, have kids of his own who then refer to him as himself, right? And sort of the same dismissive sort of way. And that just was so like painful to me. Like, could you imagine you started out this chip on your shoulder because your drunk father who would talk about his own father, like the man himself. And then your kids would just be like, oh yeah, himself over there, like fuck,
See, I did have a few, like as a child, my dad got really drunk and would start talking about his dad, and they were pretty sad. Well, no, they were more along the lines of, I was a fucking asshole and he died, and don't worry, that's not going to happen to you. Whoops.
Oh my God.
Whoopsie doodle.
Oh my God.
Lived on an Oxycontin into somewhere else. Oh, Jesus Christ. But I love like that. Just some of the lines he throws about his father, may he rot in a green and empty hell. So one of the things I love that James Sr. puts here, that he puts on his son, is that you can have no concept of what it's like without my presence. I've been here, like, you can't get away from me, as opposed to talking about his father who was never there.
Yeah. And that was sort of one of the ironies I saw this chapter, where he talked about his mother would go to every match to the point where it lost all meaning. And then he'd be whining about his dad not coming to any matches. I'm like, hey, asshole, like your mother's there because she loves you,
I do think young men in particular, we don't really appreciate our mothers until we're in our 30s.
And I think that goes back to one of the problems I have with this being a very male-centric book, where, I don't know, growing up, like obviously like our circumstances were a little different, but I looked at both my parents as like a single unit, right? Okay. It's like, it was either one or the other. It wasn't like, oh, my dad's not here. Oh, my mom's not here. It was just like, oh, my parents are here. So that was part of it where I saw, because you do see this with the book, where it is a lot about communication between fathers and sons, and how if they just like talked a little bit, and that's obviously it's one of the main plot points, is a father trying to communicate with his son, which I'm sure you'll get to.
They drop some of that chronological bullshit early on, where we have him as the conversation therapist with Hal.
Exactly. So you can kind of see where things started going off the rails, and you can see that there's obviously like this recursive quality to this book, where history is going to repeat itself. And you can tell that like we're at the point in the book where someone's trying to break the wheel in a sense, because you can see that obviously James Sr. had this relationship with his father, James Jr. had this relationship with his father, and now Hal is having the same situation with his own father. So it's just going right on down the line, right? But reading this, it's just like, no, he has this bad relationship because his father's a drunk.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's like, dude,
and the father is putting his own bullshit on him in a way, a child does not need.
Exactly. And it seems like, first of all, he seems like he bought a nicer garage for his car than he did for his own family in a trailer. Did you get like, maybe I was looking into that too much, but it seemed like.
No, I picked up on that, the way that he really fetishizes the Montclair.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
like
God, the way he talks about physical space and
mhm.
movement, like he makes reference to Marlon Brando, although throwing in the like, yeah, your goddamn mom loved Brando, but she
Yeah.
never appreciated the way he treated the world like it was a part of himself, which I think comes into the physical aspect of tennis and is going to come into the way James Incandenza Jr. They talked before that he's not really so much about the small things, but like looking at it as a grand pastiche of
Mhm.
a sport and opportunities of mathematically that show up in between. And this might have, this might be the origin point of that, the kind of fetishizing of like the physics of a thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because there's a whole section about how he drops the book on the ground, his optical science book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there's some theme of physics there, maybe. Um, um, but going back to the Brando thing, what I thought was funny about that is Brando, his mom acted in the scene with Brando, I guess, as an extra.
Yeah,
Right?
they seem to be hinting that it's the wild one. They mentioned something about
Yeah,
a motorcycle.
and he's talking about how his mom like fell in love with Brando, but never really got Brando. And to me, it seems like he's just so jealous because he also wants to be an actor.
Mm-hmm.
But then his own wife like got to act in a scene with Brando, despite
Mm-hmm.
how limited that is. That's got to be like the pinnacle of acting, like sharing a scene with Brando, you know?
Right.
So you can tell that this is all on him. Like it has nothing to do with his wife's feelings. It has nothing to do with his son's feelings.
Right.
It's his very own perception of things and how wrong they are, and
Mm-hmm.
how he just can't see that himself.
Right. And you see that. Well, go ahead. Continue.
But and this comes up. So there's another chapter that's similar to this one, where we come back to the James Sr. household that thinks, I think, reinforces that point. Which, you can have me back on. I can discuss that chapter as well. But it's also like a nice chapter that kind of like hammers home a lot of the stuff you see in this chapter as well.
Okay, yeah, I think we see and if you've ever had a drunken dad conversation, this is where they always end, where it starts with them imparting wisdom to you and letting you know how life's going to be, and of course offering you a drink or two. I don't know if you had that. I had that plenty. And then at the end, it kind of denigrates into him breaking down and showing how much it is about him. I have a bunch of quotes here from this. Just the topic of talent overall. Afraid to give my last talent the one shot it demanded. Talent is its own expectation. You either live up to it or it waves a hanky and recedes forever. I'm afraid of leaving a tombstone that says, "Here lies a promising old man." Potential may be worse than none. I'm so scared of dying without ever being seen. I was out there, a self that touches all edges. It was given me to hear my father pronounce my bodily existence as not even potentially great at the moment I ruined my knees forever. A religious moment, what I learned to be, what it means to be a body. Just meat wrapped in a flimsy nylon stocking. I felt the religion of the physical that day. You get to hear and feel your destiny at the same moment. And I've definitely had that thought before about.
That's such good writing, though, right? Would you?
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. That is very good writing, and
Yeah.
I made this argument in the last episode that as good as some of this is, if you go by like the filmmaking thing, that a great movie is a film with 3 great scenes and no bad scenes.
Mm-hmm.
You can't consider this a good book because there's so much bad in it. Like, yes, this is great, but like Spider-Man 3 got ruined by one dance scene. You cannot put all these fucking Wardine's shit in here. And
well, I do have some opinions about that, because I would have, after done reading this book, I think I would have had the same. I think I had the same exact opinion, but now that like I'm sort of reviewing this a little bit and like going back, there is a point to almost all of it, and a lot of it is subtle, and I don't think it's the. For instance,
this may be the final resistance I put up before falling on my knees and accepting the bandanaed Christ. Like,
yeah, well,
it might just happen that way.
Well, for instance, like there's a lot like the footnotes. People always say, "Oh, the footnotes," but there's like huge things that happen in the footnotes, and it's funny because I went to law school, and one thing you learn is that when you read Supreme Court cases or any like court decisions, there's a lot of footnotes, and those footnotes are like you learn very early on, like, oh no, you have to read the footnotes because that's where the law is,
Right.
and if you miss like a footnote, that's like you failing an exam.
Yeah,
okay?
you're pretty much just reading somebody's opinion unless you're referencing the actual upheld precedent behind it.
Yeah, so I had a positive bias towards footnotes coming into this book because I understand their importance. And there's a lot of things that happen in the footnotes, and even just like small details. Like I think it's in a footnote. It says the film cartridge, the master copy, supposedly is interred with his body.
Yes,
which is very, very important to know. And I think that even comes up in the very beginning of the book. And this sort of goes back to like the chronology of the book. Like something huge happens in the beginning of the book, and you don't realize the significance of it until you have read all of it, unfortunately.
Okay.
So what were we talking about? So yeah, going back to BS 1960.
And we were getting a little bit on just the nature of talent and expectation and failing to capitalize on gifts and work.
My question is, when do you think his dad started drinking? He says he started drinking when he was young. I'm like, part of me, I don't know if like this is like tinfoil, like I'm just looking too much into a book and this is like a high school English class, but part of me is thinking, do you think he was like drunk on the court? And obviously I think it's ambiguous of whether there were spiders or not, because it never comes out and says it. So I think that's there where there's a good argument to me that like there might not have been a spider that caused him to slip. And then the question is, well, what caused him to slip? Right.
So you think he might be throwing an excuse spider that might not have existed in there.
Yeah.
I think you might be reading too much into it, but this honestly comes just with my own moderate issues with drink, which is, because drinking is so accepted casually that I think problem drinking only really starts with trauma.
Right.
Like, I don't think people really become like sloppy, shitty, fuck up drunk until they really like need a wound to throw some gauze on there. And I would almost venture to say that it was more just because we know so little about him before this it seems way more like he's telling this as his genesis story, that like I was going to be a great tennis player and then I fell and then that was it. So I honestly don't think he was probably a problem drinker before that. This might have been the moment that led to that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't want to be one of those people that just like goes back to the. So like, is there anything else? I'm trying to think what other notes I have.
Well, I can get real quick. The part I left out in the preceding chapter that deals with this is where Hal is discussing his self-identification. How he personally, and this is him thinking to himself, that he first identified himself as a lexical prodigy, whereas he's now being encouraged to identify himself as a late blooming prodigy and possible genius. So this is a lot of we're seeing the beginning ripple of how this has gone down to have expectations of yourself, and even something as important as self-identifying. He's like, well, I've been told by other people I should self-identify as this, and how we can kind of get wrapped up in our future projections of ourselves, regardless of how true they may actually be to ourselves. Like, I don't know what oh, and I did have the thing here, reminds me of one of my favorite sayings. The specific line here is Hal is now being encouraged to identify himself as a late-blooming prodigy and possible genius at tennis who is on the verge of making every authority figure in his world and beyond very proud indeed. Which reminds
It's such a calculated way of saying your parents will be proud, right?
Exactly. Which reminds me again of my favorite saying when it comes to credit stealing and blame deflecting: victory has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan.
Yeah.
Just because.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
But yeah, just wondering, like, I know I'm somebody in particular where the expectations that were put upon me were very, very meager, and I was actually very angry and rebel. That's probably why I got into performance, where it's like, oh, your biggest concern is that I finish high school. Guess what? People are gonna pay to hear my goddamn thoughts and my music, and might have shot the moon a little bit too much on that one. But yeah, my particular, like, it was brought up to me when I was a kid that, like, hey, you're smart, you're fucking lazy, but you're smart. Like, if you try to do this, but I think part of it was just I had I've told people I didn't go to a real college because, like, neither of my parents, they weren't even dropouts. They never went. My dad never graduated high school. I was so ignorant of how college worked that I didn't know loans were a thing. I just immediately assumed, like, oh, well, we don't have money for college, so I'll just go to community college. And I remember when my brothers reached that age and my mom was telling them, like, go to community college, save money. And I screamed at them, no, go away to college, get the fuck away from this. Because if you are staying in your hometown and all your fuck up friends ain't doing shit, like, at least in college, you can all be fuck ups, but you all need to wake up and go to class the next day. That is such an important distinction, to just get away from. Dude, I fucking hate Belmar so much. There are 50-year-old men still getting in fist fights over shit that happened in high school. Like, people do not grow out of that shit. And I wanted them to get out of it. And like, I wish I had. Like, again, another way you influence me. If I had not lost all my high school friends because I wanted us to be a serious rock band and they wanted to get high, I started hanging out at 9 North 9th with you and your Temple friends. And then even there, the friends I made out of that group now live in their mom's basements, and their other friends don't talk to them, and all your friends are very successful. So I keep getting in the right places and making the wrong decisions.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you.
But yeah, as far as
should have went to law school. No, don't go to law school.
I should have, yes. But yeah, expectation was always, I always felt like, while I didn't have that external expectation on me, the fact that I have my own brutal, like, almost secondary voice that is, like, yelling at me for failing and not doing enough that, a parent probably should have been doing at some point. And I definitely, I feel that pain of just, like, dying and being like a nobody, just like all the nobodies before him.
Yeah, I think everyone has that, where you grow older and you start to think, well, is this it, right?
Exactly.
And I think a lot of that is just everyone is dealing with it. There's way more non-famous people than there are famous people, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like we're not the first ones,
right?
So it's like I guess.
And I mean, also to look back, like you and I aren't too far removed from, like, the generation of our family that first moved to America, where for them it was literally like, let me get the fuck out of Poland before my head ends up on a pike and the Russians starve us out. And they got over here and they were just like, this is pretty cool. I'm going to open a bar. Okay. Life complete. I give it an A.
That's it.
I give it 2 thumbs up. Would recommend.
Yeah.
And just the bar raises from there.
Maybe that's just our millennial mindset, though. Like, just do your job. Like, shut up and do your job.
Maybe. Like, dude, I'll tell you a weird thing. I didn't really know where, like, my creative part came from myself. I knew my dad drew, but I mean, like, that was really it. After his mother, my grandmother, died, we found out that she was, like, a published Christian poet. And
really,
none of us knew this. She had like 40 magazine clippings she sent into, like, Women's Christian Journal about the beauty of Christ. And fuck it, somebody liked it enough to put it on paper. So it's like, okay, that's something that could have been. I mean, I guess she was happy with the route she took, but
All right, because it's getting late.
okay,
I'm gonna have to move this. I'm gonna have to co-opt and just move the train along. So we're talking the Tennis and the Feral Prodigy, narrated by Hal Incandenza. This is such a good chapter because
yes, it is, and a lot of the same stuff bleeds in that we were just talking about, where we see how it works. In the
it's
day.
like, and this like reading this again, like when I read it the first time, I was like, okay, this is like an interesting chapter. And now reading it now, I'm just thinking like, oh shit, like Hal's gonna want some answers, and sometimes those answers don't exist. And there's going to be some devastating consequences. So it's not as easy as this chapter makes it out to be. You know, you can't just like lather on your Pine Sol and be good. You know,
right?
This
is a film narrated by Hal, says directed, recorded, edited, and written by Mario, and it's presented very much as an instructional video, but hold the racket gently at such an angle, etc. But a lot of other things bleed their way in. So if you want to take the lead on this, please be my guest.
Sorry, my wife's interrupting me.
They do that.
Now she just gave me an evil look. So yeah, and one of the things that this book is like, this film, it says it's written by Mario. We know Mario is just like a sweetheart, and
right.
This chapter is not written by a sweetheart. So it's like a lot of the things you see online, if you're sort of like looking at outlines of this book, is like, oh, this chapter was obviously written by Hal, despite what the titles say, because there's no way Mario would write something so cynical, you know?
Right.
Yeah, but good chapter.
Yeah, there's just little details in here, hit 1,000 serves to no one while himself sits and advises with his flasks. A weird line that older men's legs are white and hairless from decades in pants. I don't know how true that may be, but
we'll find out soon enough.
Yeah, we're getting there. Have himself hunched down to put a long pale arm around your shoulders and tell you that his own father had told him that talent is sort of a dark gift with its own expectation. It's there from the start and either lived up to and lost.
Here's what's great about this little section of the book. So this book is obviously, you can get like your corkboard out and start like following red yarn to different plot points and things like that. I think what's interesting about these few chapters is everything is so condensed. We see the scene between Junior and Senior, and now we see it immediately afterwards between Hal and his father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I definitely like how that's again, we're seeing the ripples happening in real time due to their positioning of where we're seeing this. Avoid these. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, love this line. Have a father who lived up to his own promise and then found thing after thing to meet and surpass the expectations, but didn't seem a whole hell of a lot happier than his own failed father, leaving yourself in a kind of feral and flux-ridden state with respect to talent. Avoid these thoughts by practicing and playing and just like, and the notion right there, if you achieve your goals, does it actually make you any happier?
Yeah. So I don't know. So this is one of the things where I highlighted where it sort of gets into one of my problems. Mm-hmm. There's like a passage here where he talks about don't be. So he talks about like turn down an extramural date, so you won't be asked again. He's like talking about, okay, so here it is. So you can be sure that henceforth Daphne, Kimberly, Jennifer will take her adolescent mating dance type ritual socialization business somewhere else. And I don't know if you want to get into this now, but one of the things with David Foster Wallace in this book is he was not a good dude. And that is one of the things that is sort of hard to come through, because you sort of, and like when I read this book, when I first read it, like I said before, like it was a very fraternal, male-oriented book, and I like thought to myself, oh, here we go, one of these. And then like reading more about David Foster Wallace and his history, I'm just like, oh, it's a male-oriented book because he's a very male-oriented person, right? And
I have seen a lot of obviously when we think of like sexual assault or misogyny, it's very commonly put on like the bro or the frat dude.
Yeah.
But I feel like there is a permanent blind spot of people who are at all sensitive or particularly well educated. We're like, well, no, that couldn't be me. Bad people do that. I'm not a dumb bad person, so I couldn't have done anything.
Yeah.
Like I've heard a lot of justifications from people.
Right. And I think so this is where you get like a lot of the so-called DFW lit bros, right? And I don't think those people, I think those people are because if you go online, if you go on like the subreddit, you see this topic comes up a lot, and there's a very like nuanced conversation about it, which is great. And I think the sort of the DFW apologist is just like a relic of the 90s or like the pre-internet, because you hear about it, you hear people talk about it, and I guess it still comes up where obviously there are like still like these conferences where people come and they discuss DFW's work, but I think a lot of the people who talk about the book now who are just getting into it are aware of that situation and are aware of the issues surrounding it, where can you separate the art from the man, right? And that's difficult to do, especially with a book like this,
because it presents so many of the problems.
Yeah, like I don't want to bring it more into your world, Jesse, like Louis C.K.
Did he get in trouble for something?
But so like part of me was like, so Dan Harmon dealt with this, where he had an issue with a subordinate when he was running Community, and he had like a very famous apology, right? And that was sort of like considered a gold standard of apologizing in the Me Too era, where you sort of take responsibility for it, and you give like, and I don't know if you listened to his apology, but it's like a very heartfit.
I don't remember the specifics, but I definitely read it at the time.
Yeah, so it's like he made these advances on a subordinate, and it sort of amounted to, it got to the point where like the subordinate like started questioning her own talent, like, is he keeping me around just because he has a crush on me, or because he thinks I'm actually really talented, and he got like very mean to her, to the point where like she left the show, and she called him out on it, right? And he actually said, you know what, like, you're right. And he did a lot of soul searching, and he did this on his own podcast. He sort of went on this long sort of speech about like what had happened. He was very open and honest with it, and just pretty much saying like why he was wrong. And even like the person who this happened to, she even came out and said like, you know, I'm satisfied with this apology. Like this is how you rectify things in this era we're living in. And Louis C.K., he also kind of did that. Like you heard stories about him like reaching out to some of these women and sort of apologizing. And he sort of turns himself into a person who was aware of sort of the misogyny and patriarchy in the entertainment industry, where I know he would give like work to women comedians and writers, and he was sort of considered an ally. And this stuff comes out, and okay, it's like, okay, maybe you try to allow some redemption, but the problem I had is when I listened to his stand-up again with the new, so if you go back and you listen to Hilarious, or
he talks about jerking off
and you just think like, oh boy, like I can't listen to this. I cannot listen to this knowing what I know now, you know. Where I could go back and watch Community and be like, okay, yeah, like this is great, this is still great. Whereas like, I don't know, there's just something about like that where it's just like, oh no, this does not have the same effect.
You know, that's part of the thing is I think it makes it so much more unpleasant if they actually address it in the art itself. Like a lot of the rock stars of the 70s were known to sleep with underage girls.
Yeah.
Part of the reason you can enjoy that is they don't have any songs about like, you know, I'll pick you up from middle school, come on my bus.
That's the other thing. It's like you can't have any heroes anymore. Like you hear about things like David Bowie and it's just like, so like all this stuff was coming out, and you're just thinking, we can't forget about this. Like we
Right.
can't just overlook it.
You have to admit, part of the unfairness of it is David Foster Wallace isn't here to answer.
And this is the other thing that I want to get into. So Jonathan Franzen wrote like a really it's like a semi-obituary about David Foster Wallace, and like he sort of says, because they were friends, but he sort of says that his suicide was done in a way to cause the most effect to those around him. Like he did it in a very dramatic way. And that is sort of like, it's like, I don't know if he were still around what he would say about his behavior, because he was, to be frank, he was violent, right? He was preying on younger women who looked up to him, like his own students, right? So he was not a good person. And one of the things, I don't know if you saw the end of the tour yet, where it's
I did. I was very angry with how just like, oh shucks, they made him.
So I think I had the same, so like watching that, I watched that right after I finished Infinite Jest, before I started like learning more about David Foster Wallace's history. And I thought like, oh, this is just a book about a guy who's just jealous because girls don't like him. And then like, which I thought was like, oh, this is like such a like a reductive movie. Like, oh, what is this garbage? And then I read more. I'm just like, oh no, wait, it's like really on point. Like he is the type of person who got jealous when girls didn't like him. Right. So it's like, oh, that's actually a very accurate portrayal of his character. And he did have like, obviously he was like, he had his own demons like alcoholism, but you know, I'm sure you and I, you talk about this a lot. We know a lot of the same people who are dealing with a lot of the same issues with addiction. They don't necessarily turn into sexual predators because of that addiction, right?
Yeah, that's that is one of the things. Is that, like, women are at bedrock just better than men, because there's certain impulses that just don't happen with them quite as much. You don't often meet the female recovering alcoholic that like, oh yeah, I put my boyfriend and my kids in the hospital several times. Yeah.
And I just say that because people like to say, well, he was dealing with his own things. I hate saying like people, because it's like, what, like, give me a citation. But it's like out there where it's talked about, well, he was dealing with his own problems with alcoholism, with depression, with anxiety. But like, does that, like, that does, to me, that doesn't excuse his behavior, you know? And it sucks because it really is a good book. And I hate that I am, when I go back to it, like when I first finished it, I was like, okay, you know, I read it. It's okay. It's good. And then like, I learned more about his personal history. And then like, I'm looking more into the book and I'm just liking it more and more. And I hate it. I hate it. And like I said, I don't know if we recorded this, but I've been trying to sort of expand my worldview a bit by reading authors that don't necessarily look like me. And, you know, one of the first books I read after this was the Broken Earth trilogy it's like a sci-fi book by N.K. Jemisin. And to me, that was like such a breath of fresh air after reading this, because it's got like like it's written by a woman. A woman is the main character. A lot of the other characters are women, and there's like there's trans women, and it was such an interesting book, such a great book, and it wasn't like hammed in there like, oh, I'm going to write a trans character just because it's 2018 and this is what people do and I'm going to be woke. But like, it's just like a very interesting book with very interesting characters, right? Whereas this book is like, the characters are very interesting, but they're very shallow in where they're coming from. Right.
I read this as a lot of the characters they weren't necessarily their own people. They were like one or two characteristics that they slapped a first name on.
Yeah, especially with the women.
The women have not done much. I think Millicent Kent might be the one that's made the biggest impression so far. Jamming Mario's face and her big old titties.
Yeah, exactly. So you could do like I guess it really can't do it with this book because there's so many characters, but like the Bechdel test of other females talk, and
I don't think any females have really talked yet.
Yeah, so. exactly. And there are some very dark chapters coming up where some of these women talk about their own life experiences.
Mhm.
So like I do want to give the book itself a fair shake and say that there are some very deeply developed female characters as well. But you can also tell that they're sort of subordinate to the male characters. And one of the like, this is going to drive someone crazy because I know some of the people on the subreddit listen to this, but there was someone who sort of mentioned it very succinctly where you can't, and this goes back to what I was saying before, where I think people are approaching this book a little bit more nuanced. You can't go into it like, first of all, I think what they said is like the patriarchy is a real thing, and if you don't believe that, then you're just not reading the right things, and you're just not educating yourself enough. Right. And that's such a great way to put it. Like, so this is something like you called me about the documentary about Apu that was coming out a few years ago, if you remember that.
Yes, the
and
problem
we had a
with
conversation.
Apu.
Yeah. And I thought about this a lot because now doing the work that I do, you start to realize that people's perceptions, just because they differ from yours, doesn't mean that they're wrong. So growing up, I remember I had when I went to college, I had a literature professor who was from India, right? And one of the things she talked about was Apu and how sort of prejudiced and racially insensitive he was. And I just thought, no, you're out of your mind, right?
Yeah. Shut up. What do you know?
Have
you seen every episode? Have you seen every episode? Okay.
Exactly. Honestly, Jess, that was like the mindset I had. Like, I think I quoted a joke to her, like this is not helping your situation. But because I thought, okay, well, like Apu, I love Apu as a character. I'm not racist, so how could the character of Apu be racist, right? And that's such a dumb way of looking at things.
Checks out to me. I don't know what you're talking about. That sounds right on the money.
but there is and you had a lot of people coming out sort of saying like, no, yeah, like Aziz Ansari, I think, said like he always grew up and he had to sort of fight that stereotype that was sort of solidified because Apu was ingrained in our culture throughout the early 90s, right? When these young kids were growing up, and that's a shame, that sucks. And they have a point. And like, yeah, they should just write out Apu. Like, so Paul F. Tompkins has a really good bit on one of his it's not on any of his records, but on his YouTube recordings. He talks about Chick-fil-A and how like people say like, oh, like, okay, well, what's the big deal? Their chicken's so good. It's so good. Yeah. So yeah, just go eat their chicken. And he's just like, it's chicken. Just find other chicken. like so it's very hate-filled chicken. Like, just buy some other chicken. So it's like I feel the same way. It's like, okay, it's like I feel like the people whose opinions matter, it doesn't matter that just because they're the ones who are affected most by it, like we shouldn't just dismiss them.
Mm-hmm.
Because they do have a point, because they're the ones who have to live with it.
Right.
And that goes sort of back with you see people, it comes up a lot, like people are looking for permission to maybe enjoy certain books. So it's like they go to Mary Kay, who's the author, who had a relationship. I don't know if it was like
Mary Karr.
Mary Karr, who knew David Foster Wallace and sort of was a victim of David Foster Wallace. And you see that like people always say like, well, we had permission from Mary Karr to like David Foster Wallace. And to me that like misses the point, you know? Like, just enjoy the book. And I've enjoyed the book, but it's also something that needs to be reckoned. I don't know how else to say it. It's something that I'm still like freshly thinking about. And right now I'm into.
I know you said part of it that you looked at this was also as something of genius worship.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
General, how we just let them slide.
And you can just go, there's so many great articles written about this by so many great authors. They talk about this exact subject that will probably be much better. So you could just Google David Foster Wallace abuse and get like, there's like a New Yorker article. There's like I said, Jonathan Franzen wrote something for the New York Times. And I think it's just important for people to maybe read those, because in the same way that I've sort of evolved to understand where people were coming out with Apu, I think the people who are sort of very defensive of David Foster Wallace can sort of have the same awakening I had, where like, okay, these like there's some very serious issues that you kind of need to make yourself aware of, right? and just educate yourself. That's all it really is.
Right.
You know,
I do,
but also educate yourself.
I do think the bedrock that would honestly move a lot of these conversations forward is if they just started with the caveat, like, listen, you're allowed to like the bad thing. I feel like a lot of the reaction is a gut reaction of like, what do you mean I'm not allowed to like this? It's like, no, you can. Like, that's personally, I didn't really have as much trouble getting with all this just because I listen to music that has like fucking murderers and pedophiles, proud ones have made. It's like, yeah, well, it takes all kinds. What can you do? But yeah, that's definitely something. I do feel there's a little bleed over, and I'll make this quick, but I know, like, have you watched that Dave Chappelle thing that just released yesterday?
Oh, no, not a new one. He's got a new one?
He released just a half-hour thing on YouTube. It was literally recorded. Dang. It was recorded a week ago at an outdoor venue in his hometown, and it's just called 846, and he just talks about all the George Floyd stuff, and it's incredibly powerful. Now, he's gotten in trouble for some transphobic, misogynist stuff, but the thing is, it's all been words. It hasn't been anything he's actively done. And his last special famously got like a 3% rating on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, and then 100% rating from the audience, because it's kind of like, well, even in this thing yesterday that doesn't hit on anything, I'm already reading reviews of like, well, okay, he said a very powerful thing, but don't forget that he's transphobic. And that's where it annoys me a little bit, where it's like white authors telling a black man, like, well, while I appreciate you being on the right side this time, don't forget you were on the bad.
Yeah. And in one of his specials, he said something that was so like, don't make enemies out of your allies, right? Yeah. Like, that's like,
that is something I feel that is a problem the right does not have, and it's the reason they win elections.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're too, like, they're on like the, you should be red, whereas on the blue side, it's you're not the right shade of blue.
Yeah. I gotta look that up. Yeah, that's
look it up. All right, you want to call it?
Yeah, I mean, so do you want to? There's one bit where we go to the Ennett house. It's like the transcripts from the
we get a selection.
I mean, this is just like people talking about, anonymous voices just talking about their lives.
We do have DFW drops in a humorous line about people so winged out on drugs they forget most of the Limbaugh administration, which probably was pithy and cute and not terrifying at all at the time.
We got a name drop of New Jersey here at the end. I'm just noticing. So this is I feel like I'm gonna re-listen to this and be like, oh, sound like a fucking idiot.
I think,
and I'm gonna send you a text and like, just delete this.
I think you sound great. Did I sound great? I look to you for validation.
You sounded no. I mean, I've listened to every episode just because I didn't want to repeat myself. And I think it's great that you had Katu King on. I feel like a lot of men on this show, which I guess is just I'm
looking at another female guest right now.
No, but I found it great to get sort of like get her perspective of it, because I don't want to I don't know a lot of women who read this book, right? So it was cool to see sort of her opinion of it.
You want to know something fucked up? Our only iTunes review right now pretty much said, I love the show. Never have her back on because your sexual tension ruined the episode for me. I'm actually working on somebody right now who is a woman who is like an Infinite Jest super fan. So,
oh, really?
Yes, I'm really curious to see. I'm actually looking at some bigger names to get. We have somebody confirmed. They're local, but until that's actually recorded, I don't want to get into it. But I really want to get a diverse group on here. We got into it a little bit today. We talked about maybe splitting this into 2 episodes, but I think I'm going to keep it as one. But
you said that, and I'm sorry, I kind of because also I feel like I'm definitely not the authority on this, right?
Right. Well,
right now I'm reading a lot of because the world's so fucked up. I'm reading a lot more Noam Chomsky and Naomi Klein, and
you got to recommend some stuff. I haven't read a lot of Chomsky.
Read Requiem for the American Dream.
Okay.
It will ruin you.
Love it.
There's like, even like if you don't feel like reading it, I think the documentary is free on YouTube.
All my favorite art ruins my day. I'm fine with that.
And Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, another one that'll just fuck you up, and that just America is a lie. Okay.
Perfect.
So.
Okay. But you know what I think I'm going to do? I told you I wanted to split it into 2 episodes because those were topics I wanted to cover in a different episode. But I think what would be better is to actually bring back some previous guests for a round table.
Maybe more of an
topic.
authority figure on gender politics, unlike me, who just like.
I'm sure I could find another man that knows everything there is to know.
Yeah. So this is just sort of like, that was just sort of my quick reaction to all that was sort of going through my mind as I was looking up his history after I'd read the book. So don't like, I'm sure my opinion could change as I maybe look into this deeper, get a little more perspective. But it's a good book. It's a good book.
Maybe not worth all the hype, but
I don't know. Like it's growing on me more and more. Like I said, like
how long ago did you finish it?
I finished it. Let's see. I started it in like December, I want to say, and I think I finished it, of course, like just before quarantine. Maybe I have to look like when I texted.
See, what's crazy is just like reading this and having to summarize all of it and write everything down is it's taken up so much of my time that I think it's going to take me like over a year to finish this book.
It's also a great way to sort of read the book too, because if just to like sit down and discuss it with somebody, you could absorb it so much better, like I wish I was like able to just like sit down and like just discuss 30 pages at a time, just so like maybe I could have gotten a little more of the details that I missed the first time.
It is a lot of that, particularly when they go in the insane amount of details and descriptions. It's very easy to get detail fatigue and just like, oh, okay, let me look for quotation marks so I can get to something important. There we go. So
yeah. Oh, so it looks like I ended in January.
Oh, so you actually knocked it out pretty quick, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, audiobook. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Cousin Frank, thank you for joining us.
Man.
Yeah, Infinite Just Man. Yeah. I am going to stop recording, but you and I can talk for a few more seconds.
Yeah.
Which I say every episode and never edit out because I don't take this that seriously. All right.